All right, everybody, welcome to the first episode of The Adventures of the Monk and the Monarch. Opening simple. Here with me I have Mildra the Monk.
Hi.
And I am the Mad Monarch. And for our first episode, we're going to be here talking about anime reboots. And in part how they connect or how they relate to Western reboots. So as for show format, first we will discuss what anime we've been watching these past weeks. So Mildra, what have you been watching?
Well, I had a bit of a delay, and I'm going to be doing a bit of cheating with something anime adjacent. The delay was the fact that about a week ago I ended up moving into a new place, a better place, out of the district that I've been in for the past 7 years. But the cheating end of things is that I've been catching up on Kamen Rider Revice, which technically isn't anime, but it is adjacent enough for me, so I'm counting it. Especially since another Kamen Rider is getting getting an adaptation of its manga sequel, what with Futo Detectives being worked on.
I have somehow never watched any Kamen Rider.
Oh, maybe I can guide you through that in a future installment. Now I should note, Revice is an anniversary show, specifically for Kamen Rider's 50th anniversary, since the original Kamen Rider debuted back in 1971. And anniversary shows are nothing new for the series, but whenever it happens, people get nervous because a certain batch of people end up showing up and end up stinking up the joint. Revice is as the third series in the Reiwa era, the current Imperial era we're in. I like it, but I get the feeling it's going to be divisive. And the reason I say that is you've got a whole generation who started out with Kamen Rider and started out with Tokusatsu as a whole in the early 2000s, in the midpoint of the Heisei era, where a lot of shows were trying to aim for darker spins on things. When in the past there's been a whole lot of camp regarding Tokusatsu, and yeah, there's certainly cheese when it comes to Power Rangers, but Japanese Tokusatsu can be just as cheesy, if not more so at times. I mean, I bring up how one of the more hallmark entries in the Metal Heroes era, Jiraiya, was weird sometimes, and there's the WTF stuff like some of the stuff in the Showa era, especially stuff like Stronger or Amazon. But a lot of people they look at this idea of Kamen Rider as the more serious Tokusatsu, which technically speaking is true, but not to the point that one would think. In fact, I'm going to be doing a discussion on that seriousness fallacy in a few weeks on my own show.
So
while I do like
about Kamen Rider, like this anniversary. I think what is important for any show that has been going on for as long as Kamen Rider has, does this anniversary show still kind of hold true to what made the originals and beginning of this show good?
Yeah, the thing is, with Kamen Rider, you have to after the first series, each series after that was essentially its own beast. Sometimes dipping into what came before. But because of that, there's been a whole lot of changes and a whole lot of hands, even with some common motifs. And I'd say it does, especially since all of the forms, when it comes to the primary duo of Revi and Vice, are tributes to writers that have come before, aside from their main form. While certain diehards and certain purists will cry foul at how it appears. I will be flat out honest on one thing. I do not respect purists. And I do not respect historical accuracy people. Not because they don't have an argument, because a lot of times they end up seeing the forest for the trees.
Oh, I see what you mean. I figure historical accuracy really only matters that much if that's what the show is going for. If the show doesn't care about historical accuracy, I don't really care.
I'll use a bit of an example from one of my own areas of expertise, because I've been a fan of the samurai fantasy RPG and card game series Legend of the Five Rings for 20 years. And a common critique I often hear is that it is not comparable to historical Japan. Like it has too many it's too anachronistic to be real samurai or something like that. Which, if you want to get real pedantic about it, is true. But here's where the asterisk comes in. Rich Wolf and the people at Alderac and now the people at Fantasy Flight Games were never trying to do historical Japan. They were trying to do their own Japan-influenced setting, and specifically inspired by the works of Kurosawa, called Rokugan. So trying to apply historical Japan to that is silly at best.
Plus, I would imagine it's a tabletop RPG. Just tweak the settings. You're the DM. You can do that.
Well, the funny thing about it is, Legend of the Five Rings started out as a card game with an evolving story, but ended up getting an RPG after a few years, and then that ended up taking off.
Yeah, I've always known about Legend of the Five Rings. I've always kind of wanted to play it, but no one around me had any idea what it was or cared to learn, so it's something I just ended up missing out on.
Yeah, I considered myself fortunate, and because I've heard that story a lot, that's the reason why I set up my temple. The other major show to get back on the rails of things that I ended up watching, in fact I finished the other night, is Getter Robo Arc.
That is another one I just never got around to seeing.
Now I will admit a bit of bias because I love the works of Ken Ishikawa, and Getter Robo Arc was his unfinished piece. He passed away before he could finish the manga. And the show, I consider the show to be the best 7 out of 10 that I will see, because it's very clear that they did not have the best budget. I mean, they brought in the guy who's directing. His previous claims to fame were things like Shin Getter versus Neo Getter, which was an OVA series, and New Getter Robo, which was a 26-episode anime in the early 2000s when everybody was trying to figure out this whole digipaint thing. That's why, if you ever wondered why a lot of anime from the early 2000s looks kind of splotchy whenever you try and put it in HD, digipaint had come around, and a lot of animation studios were just trying to adopt it, and there were some, as it's said in the engineering world, teething troubles.
Yeah, as some of our listeners are going to start to notice, Mildra here knows a lot more about, like, the names of people behind shows than I do. I know Satoshi Kon, Miyazaki, and if you press me, I could probably remember a few other names.
Well, well, what kind of monk would I be if I wasn't surrounded by tomes, scrolls, and all that?
Yep.
But the big reason I end up researching that kind of thing is because it's never enough for me to just say, oh, this show is good or this show is bad. It's a case of I need to figure out why it is what it is. Sometimes I end up reaching dead ends on things because people don't want to talk. Sometimes I'll end up going down massive rabbit holes, like I did when in high school I was researching what the hell happened with the Heaven's Gate film.
Every so often, I'll see a show where there's something just so interesting about the show, I'll look into it a bit more. Like with Paranoia Agent, I'd actually sat down and listened to the director's commentary for the last 3 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And the making of Paranoia Agent was something weird. That show never should have successfully finished.
Well, technically speaking, Cowboy Bebop and Big O are 2 other cases where they shouldn't have finished.
No, but like with Paranoia Agent, like episode 3 was almost finished before episode 2 was supposed to come out, and they realized they'd done almost no work on episode 2. Like every name on the Japanese credits is a fake name because no one wanted to attach their name to it because they thought it was going to be horrible. But did you ever see Paranoia Agent?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, when you see the TV crew later in the series, those are all of the fake names they used for the episode 2.
Yeah, it's Are you familiar with the term Alan Smithy?
I am not.
Um, for the until the mid 2000s, Alan Smithy was a pseudonym that was used by directors in Hollywood for decades. That was basically a shorthand of I hated this film and I don't want my name attached to it.
I wonder how often that actually happens. Probably a lot.
It wasn't widespread, and eventually the Alan Smithy handle was retired. But although I have a suspicion that the equivalent is still around, just not using that name because people got wise to it.
Yeah. See, as for me, I've only really had a chance to watch 2 shows recently. One I'm just starting is the second season of the 86.
Mm-hmm.
I am 2 episodes in, and I already wish they ended it at season 1. It takes all of 10 minutes to just kill the ending of the previous season. Like, I don't know if you've seen the 86 yet.
I do have it on my list, and I did put it on my short list whenever I want to make fun of Giga for saying that Mecha is dead in the West.
Yeah.
Because one, I am a very petty motherfucker. 2, I do find the concept of taking a lot of mecha concepts and putting in some of the controversies that have happened in real life over the years regarding drone warfare a interesting prospect. And 2, just from an outside perspective, for whatever reason, there's parts of 86 that reminded me of the novel Starship Troopers, not the film. The film and the novel with Starship Troopers are 2 completely different affairs.
One day I will read that book. But no,
it's kind of funny how vividly I remember that book when I haven't touched it since high school.
Yeah. It's kind of weird the things you do remember vividly. Like, I remember a lot about the Shannara books from Terry Brooks, I believe was his name.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people kind of gave him shit in the modern day, but I still really liked a lot of the books, even if some of them were really boring.
Oh.
But anyway, back to the 86 before we go off on a completely unrelated tangent again.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the one thing you really kind of gotta get over in the 86 is the whole discrimination bad thing is so poorly done because of how on the nose it can get. Like, did you ever get to find out why the 86 were separated from everybody else?
No.
So, this is not a major spoiler. It is just incredibly stupid. It's because, I'm not sure if you've noticed this, all the people in the main city have white hair. The 86 do not. That's the reason. Right there.
I remember some people saying that the whole 11s thing in Code Geass was a little on the nose.
It's been so long since I've seen Code Geass, I don't remember the 11s.
Japan being after Japan got conquered by Britannia being referred to as Area 11 and native Japanese being referred to as 11s. And basically second-class citizens.
Okay. That makes sense. I had to think about that for a second. I only remember little bits of Code Geass. I'd watched it once. But yeah. 86 kind of shines because it doesn't focus too much in that first season on the actual discrimination going on. And considering what I've seen in the second season, that's a good thing they avoided that topic. But what it does really well is the focus is not so much on that, but on what you do when you're in that situation. And whether or not you let that situation decide what kind of person you're going to be.
Mm-hmm.
That's an actually interesting take on the topic.
Yeah.
But that's kind of all resolved by the end of Season 1. Season 1 gave a lot of characters an absolutely fantastic ending. So I was thinking it was going to do something like Psycho-Pass did, where you have Season 1 kind of focused mostly around the one enforcer, but Season 2 it kind of becomes Akane's story going forward. They didn't do that here, and it just killed all of the great endings they had for some of these characters. And I've never turned on a show so quickly before in my life. Like, I don't want to spoil it for you just because I can't get into details about why it pissed me off.
I'll probably end up making my judgment on that in due time, especially given the crusade that I want to go on when it comes to melding anime with tabletop. Since, well, most of the people who claim to be big fans of both aren't doing their damn job. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah. But yeah, like 86 is good if you can get over some of the dumb hurdles like hair color is the basis for discrimination.
Was that the only one that you had delved into, or was there another one?
The only other one is actually related to today's topic, the Digimon 2020 reboot, even though most of the series came out in 2021, not 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I grew up with Digimon. Like, I was not a Pokemon guy as far as the anime was concerned. Digimon was my thing. I don't care how lame and cheesy it was.
Oh. Whenever people turn up their noses about cheesiness, I always end up reciting an age-old bit of wisdom. People in glass houses should not throw stones. Because I guarantee you somebody turning up their nose at something being cheesy has something just as cheesy in their library that I can throw in their face.
80% chance they listen to Journey. Everybody likes Don't Stop Believin'. That's one of the cheesiest things ever written.
Look, I had somebody turn up their nose at me about my appreciation when it came to Power Rangers as a kid, and I'm like, motherfucker, you listen to Queen.
No, slightly unrelated. I think Power Rangers was one of the only shows I watched growing up that the farther it got into the show, the worse the or the graphics of the show became. Like, those effects got worse as time went on, I swear.
Well, a lot of it has to do with them having a shoestring budget, and in the case of In Space, it has to do with a massive miscommunication.
Yeah.
Because Saban was told that the next season that they'd be adopting, Mega Ranger, was going to be very space themed, and that the actual show, the actual Mega Ranger, is more device and technology themed. So they had to say, screw it, we'll do it ourselves. So they had to, which is why a lot of the FX in that entry were so terrible.
But yeah, with the Digimon though, it's kind of hard to describe what made the original so fun to watch, because inevitably it's the power of friendship prevails in every situation. I know that's like hokey kid cartoon shit, but it did it so well. And the design. To
be honest, I'll take that over some writers having an everything sucks cynicism attitude.
God, what was the show that everyone was like so big on in like the late 90s, early 2000s? It was Gantz. I think that was the name of the show.
Gantz did better in its manga than it did in its anime.
Yeah, I only saw the anime and it was just so much edgy shit. Like,
the big problem was Gantz is one of those cases, and there were a lot of them around that time. And arguably, this is still an issue, though not as big of an issue as it was 20 years ago, of adapting a work into an anime while its manga is still in production.
Yeah, I almost don't understand that, but to a degree I do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you want to strike while the iron's hot, but then you end up with stuff like Naruto filler, which is some of the worst anime I've ever watched is Naruto filler.
I look at that kind of thing as a consequence of how television was produced at the time versus now. Nowadays you can get away with doing a whole season, then taking a break, and then doing a whole season again, as opposed to having to constantly put stuff out week to week.
Yeah, which was weird. With that 86 we mentioned earlier, both seasons came out this year, which I can't think of the last time I saw that happen.
There's not a whole lot of precedent for that kind of thing, simply because of how the Coof ended up throwing everything for a loop.
Yeah. Back to the actual Digimon show, though.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if we're talking about the original for a second, for those who never saw it, it basically works like a Monster of the Day kind of show. Something shows up, Usually it's resolved by the end of the episode by Digimon getting big and stronger. Just kind of basic stuff you would expect out of a monster of the day with evolving monsters.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we get to the reboot, this is kind of where the reboot shines, is where it no longer follows that formula. Like, for the first 30 episodes, it's like just a straight building conflict with multiple parts going on. Nothing's really resolved after 1 or 2 episodes. You'll be following multiple groups of the Digidestined as, like, this whole thing starting to resolve. So it changed a lot of the core of the show for this reboot. At the same time, it kind of understands what each Digidestined is supposed to be doing. Like, it never names their crests in this, but in the original you had Tai, the leader, who had the crest of courage. There was friendship, light, hope, knowledge. It never actually names them in this one, but they still all fill that role. And because you're no longer like having just one monster showing up at a time and probably one of the Digidestined's Digimon evolving to take care of it, it feels a lot more like they're working as like a cohesive team at times. So I kind of think this reboot's a bit better than the original.
Would you say that it is the original Digimon Adventure without the fat?
Not quite, because once like huge plot lines and arcs kind of come to an end, it does kind of fall back into that episodic nature, and that's where the show's at its absolute weakest. Because you follow the big lines of story and whatnot, and then you just kind of have episodic nonsense for a bit. Also, I think it might be longer, because I think this is like 67 episodes compared to like 48. I might need to look that up later. But go on.
The thing for me, the thing with when I have a long. I was never one of those people who was in that Pokemon versus Digimon debate. I was the person who stepped right in the middle and said, "Both of you are fucking idiots."
You're not wrong.
And which ends up getting me on the bad side of both sides. I will say Digimon has had more interesting games over the years.
I'll say they've had more interesting ideas for games, but their actual games are almost all terrible.
I will take an interestingly bad game than a predictable one, because when it comes to Pokemon, after a while, the insistence on that formula and the fact that they are trapped in a logistical nightmare, as Fox Cade pointed out, makes it that the only games I'm interested in across the gens is the spin-offs. And even then, the last one in that category that I was interested in was Pokken Tournament. But when it comes to my history with Digimon, I have described Digimon as inconsistent quality, because you have a lot of instances throughout where it'll start off kind of and then get really good, and then back into and then really good again, and rinse and repeat. I've frequently seen, this has been a narrative that I've frequently seen with seasons of starting off weak and then a arc change, and things start to get real good.
This is almost the opposite of that, where it starts off so great, but then again it dips back down into the episodic nature for a while. Then it gets good again once it goes back to the kind of longer building, multiple episode arcs going on.
Yeah, and I was hesitant when this remake was announced, because not because of the quality, because obviously I wouldn't have known at the time, but more of what I felt it represented, especially coming off of things like Tri and Kizuna Last Evolution. This idea of constantly looking backwards, which is a very poor thing to do with any franchise.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, the ghost season seems to be well received. I haven't seen it yet, so my fears may have been unfounded. But it is something to be wary of.
Yeah. So I guess this is a good point to kind of transition into the topic of just anime reboots in general and what makes them good, what makes them bad. Like, why does this reboot work? Now, I think for Digimon, it kind of became it's somewhat obvious. They knew it worked in the original show. They didn't try to, like, take away from how goofy it could get with, like, the power of friendship and all that. That is still very much at the core. You still got a lot of great Digimon designs, fun evolutions, and simple but enjoyable characters. They knew all of this is kind of what made that original show work and did not want to take away from that. And instead kind of changed the format it was presented in. They gave you, like, much higher stakes in the story, the longer building story arcs from episode to episode. So they kind of just wanted to add to the core of what made it work, to give you something a bit different, but it still feels familiar. Like, it still feels like I'm watching Digimon, even if the very first plot line involves him stopping a nuclear bomb from going off on Japan.
Yeah. Now, for me personally, when I've previously discussed this kind of thing elsewhere, and in an episode of my podcast that I called the Brotherhood Effect, because I'd say the idea of doing these kind of enhanced remakes of works that came before really ended up starting because of the wild success of Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, and because of that, I think we have to segment the remake concept into two categories. One category is enhanced remakes or catch-ups, i.e. the original was done when the source material hadn't finished. So now we're doing a do-over now that the original material actually has finished. The other case is just a flat out remake. And there's two instances of this that I want to bring up in points of comparison. Obviously, something like Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood needs no introduction. Its quality is not under debate.
Even if I haven't watched it yet.
It's pretty much an established name by this point.
Yeah, like I saw the original Full Metal Alchemist, liked it. Ending was kind of meh.
Like I said, they had it wasn't finished, so I had to come up with things out of whole cloth. I even have the same problem with Akira.
You know, even not knowing Akira was based off a manga, there is obviously stuff missing from that movie.
Yeah, only the first 2 volumes of Akira were published when the movie went into production. So they ended up taking most of the first 2 volumes and some bits of notes from the planned finale. But as much as the film Akira is a classic, even though certain animators keep using that camera shot way too much. Like, yeah, we get it. You watched Akira. Could you show what other anime you were quote unquote influenced by?
Yeah.
Sorry, I got a bit ahead of myself.
You're good.
But the original manga, the monstrosity that it is, and I know you've seen those giant volumes of Akira anytime you go into a bookstore.
Yeah.
Is most certainly a cut above. But Akira is just one instance of what happens when you're trying to fill in the blanks when you don't have a creation to fall back on, which is a story for another time when it comes to the pitfalls of adaptation. But then on the other hand, you have something like I'll use Sailor Moon Crystal as an example for this kind of thing. Now, as much of a classic and as influential as the original Sailor Moon is, there was a lot of filler. There was a lot of filler, and it's been my go-to punching bag when it comes to cell reuse.
That and Dragon Ball Z.
I'd actually say Sailor Moon is a bigger offender when it comes to reusing cells.
That's quite possible. I've rewatched Dragon Ball Z quite a bit, but I don't think I've rewatched all of Sailor Moon since I saw it growing up.
Especially since you had to go with fan subs for the final season because there were too many jokes that wouldn't translate. But within when it came to Crystal, the idea was to try and cover the arcs in half the fat. And while the last end of it, they decided to make it into 2 movies, which I'm kind of iffy about. There were problems. Chief among them, shoujo manga art styles tend to be very detailed. Both shoujo and I'd say to an extent, certain seinen manga tend to be very detailed in their art style. And when you have detailed art, it's very tricky to translate that especially on a TV budget, into animation. This is the reason why so much of anime prefers more simple designs, and why a series like, say, Berserk is never going to get a proper adaptation simply because of the detail of its artwork.
I don't know if I'd say never, because I think JoJo's did a pretty good job with that, of having some very weirdly detailed animations.
Yeah, I'd say
that might be more of an outlier, though, of what you expect.
It very much is. And when it came to the animation issues, I look at that as a case of a rush job when it came to Crystal that they did get better at, but some of the effects that ended up staying in were the kind of thing where I'd be embarrassed to have that on my resume.
Crystal is another one of those anime I've been meaning to sit down and watch, but I still have One Piece to catch up on.
But when it comes to the reason I split Anime Reboots into those 2 forms is so that we have a clear intent on what's going on. Because a lot of times a lot of what would be considered reboots tend to fall more into the category of second chance anime, as I call it.
Kind of like with Fruits Basket?
Yes. Fruit Basket is one example. I'd say a couple other very strong examples of this kind of thing would be Sorceress Stabber Orphan, which the anime that was recently done by Studio Dean, and we're supposed to be getting the 2nd season sometime next year. Is what I keep hearing. Unless it already finished, and then I'll eat crow about that. It is trying to be closer to the light novel series. The original that aired in 1997 took a lot of liberties, including creating new characters whole cloth. And again, a lot of it has to do with having essentially the first act of a story without having any guideline on how to finish it up. So you do the best with what you've got.
I think actually one of the more prominent examples I can think of that was Hellsing.
Yes.
I like the original Hellsing. It was a fun watch, but it does not compare with Hellsing Ultimate.
I'd say the only advantage that Hellsing that the original Gonzo Hellsing had over Ultimate was the soundtrack by Yasushi Ishii.
I would need to listen to both soundtracks back to back, but I don't remember preferring one over the other.
The soundtrack with Hellsing Ultimate fits thematically, but I'd hesitate to say that it has a very strong identity, aside from a few musical stings.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
I.e., aside from a few battle tracks, if you were to hear the music on, say, a soundtrack, you wouldn't be able to conjure up certain scenes.
Yeah.
This is especially prevalent, I'd say, later on, where they start to rely more on classical and classical leaning pieces. Which, don't get me wrong, I love me some classical music. I'll listen to the overture of 1812 with cannons any day of the week, because you have to have cannons. But at the same time, to me a good soundtrack for any work, whether it be a film, whether it be an anime, whether it be a video game or whatnot, you can listen to that divorced of it, and if you've played that game or watched that film, your mind immediately conjures to the scene where it was present.
I don't think a lot of anime actually do a great job at that. Most anime music, I find, it's good, matches the moment, move on, and you'll largely forget it. Not everyone is Yoko Kanno.
to be quite honest, I think bringing up Yoko Kano is a little bit too high of a bar to cross.
I know.
Especially since Kano isn't really all that active.
Yeah.
And even beyond that, there are certain composers who if I hear their stuff, I'm going to immediately recognize it. Shimomura has certain stings that I can immediately recognize. Um, obviously, no one's going to confuse anything that Jam Project is involved with anything else.
Yeah.
But but audio design is something that I've become more and more in tune with, especially after listening to that mini documentary about how Mick Gordon does soundtracks for his work. It was something that he did shortly after Doom 2016 came out.
No, I've been thinking here after you mentioned it. I'm thinking back to all of those like early 2000s anime that I'd watched. I'm like, that might be able to use a second chance. Get Backers, DN Angel, Chrono Crusade, all shows that clearly had stuff missing out of that plot that never really finished.
DN Angel would be a tricky one to do because that's still ongoing.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Chrono Crusade did finish, but truth be told, I'm fine with both endings are different, but I wouldn't say there's a whole, but it's a fairly faithful adaptation. I would say DN Angel would deserve a second chance, simply because of who animated it. DN Angel was animated by Zabek, and Zabek was kind of on the cheap side of things. There's also the fact that Zabek had a bit of an issue when it came to coming up with unique character design, because if you look at a lot of their anime and you look at the way they do faces, it does start to get similar very, very quickly.
Now, did you ever watch Get Backers?
Yeah.
Like, I really like that show. Like, more than I think most people did. But I'm not gonna sit here and say this even felt halfway complete.
Yeah, I can't comment too much on Get Backers because I think I only read like the first 2 volumes of the manga, so I don't know. So, and while I watched Get Backers, I never finished it. But I could easily see where you're going with that. And that is something that we had talked about. There are some anime adaptations that end up being unfinished. We're kind of unfinished due to outside circumstances, like Trinity Blood. As much as I would like to see Trinity Blood get a second chance, I know it would just be delaying the inevitable issue because it was never finished by its original author. Trinity Blood was technically finished, but it was finished through a ghostwriter, since the original author had passed away before he could finish his work.
I didn't know that. I do have Trinity Blood on DVD. It's another one I enjoy.
I like it. The third act is kind of a rush, but again, it's hard to fault that, especially since that was around that time when you had the whole thing of you've got 26 episodes to make it work. You're not getting any more or less than that, or you've got only 13 episodes to make this work.
I hate the episode formatting these days. It's like not everything is going to be done in the same number of episodes.
I understand why it's done because of the whole television thing. These days we're starting to see that kind of get phased out, where some people will try and spread themselves outward. Sometimes it results in a show not getting a second season. Sometimes it does, but I don't mind the stop-start approach that we have nowadays, because it means that you don't have to be constantly playing a game of chicken with the source material.
Yeah.
As far as why there's probably more second chances than there are full-on remakes, I think it largely has to do with a lot of those practices up until recently.
Yeah, I think it's a big timing thing, because, well, there's a lot more shows that deserve a second chance that came out ages ago than are coming out now.
I'd say there's also the fact that there seems to be a understanding that a lot of stuff in the 2000s does not look very good when you try and upscale it. This is the reason why I brought up the whole thing with DigiPaint in the 2000s. You try and take say Gundam Seed and try and upscale that to HD, and you start to see the problem.
I have a hatred of Gundam Seed, but I don't remember why. I remembered hating it. I cannot tell you one thing about it.
Well, that is completely beside the point. Even
Yeah.
even anime that I like from that time are not immune to this. I love Scried to Death.
Oh, that was a great show.
Which which not too long ago celebrated its 20th anniversary. But at the same time, it does have that DigiPaint issue. As much as I love, say, New Getter Robo, it really had this issue. And I'd say even with these things, a lot of times these kind of remakes are used to celebrate the anniversary of a given work. I'm not sure if this is the case with all of them, but in the case of, say, Orphan, that was done to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the manga's publication. Not manga, light novel, sorry. It did get adapted into a manga, but it started out as a light novel.
As most things seem to.
Well,
at least these days.
It's a bit of 50-50.
I think I definitely hear about it more now than I used to.
I can't say that's really the case. I have to wonder if it's more of a lot of people becoming more aware of the light novel scene and how many more anime they thought started out as manga really started as light novels.
That's possible.
But when it comes to out and out remakes, which I think is where the real point of comparison happens, is a lot of times those remakes you have somebody on board who was involved with the original project. You either have the same staff involved who were involved with the original project, or you have somebody who was involved with the original work on as some kind of consultant. And I do think that plays a significant factor of having an actual consultant, not just having them there as a name.
Like a lot of these live action versions of anime they've been doing.
I talked on that, and truth be told, even Japan doesn't have a good track record when it comes to the whole live action adaptation.
Yeah,
they're not as much of the
Some shows probably could work easily live action.
Slice of life anime can work easily, and it's been done plenty of times. The big problem is that because of when they come out, a lot of those attempts are kind of screwed from the word go.
Yeah. Because
of the fact that they have to you have the issue of choosing the wrong anime or the wrong manga, period. Because animation is very good at exaggeration. There's a whole lot of exaggeration that you can get away with animation, whether Japan or otherwise, that you cannot get away with in live action.
Like, what is it? Something like the Kenshin live action. I only saw the first movie, but I think it did really well.
When it came to both that and the live action adaptation of Blade of the Immortal, I disqualified both of them for a couple different reasons. One, there is a whole culture of period drama films in Japan, and it's very easy to grab the people who handle period dramas and have them work on something that's meant to take place in feudal Japan. So you get those people involved, and half the work is done for you. Chanbara, as well as the whole culture of Chanbara theater.
See, I wouldn't disqualify it because there's still enough interesting things going on in Kenshin that aren't really period drama related. Like the example
what I'm saying is that half the work is done for you when it comes to doing that kind of adaptation.
Oh, there's definitely aspects that make it a lot easier to handle than some others. But one thing that I think they get a lot of credit for is what they did with, what was his name? I know in the anime they referred to him using the spell of the Yoniwaban, where he had like the stripes on his sleeves to make his arms appear a different length.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I think would just look really goofy in live action to try to justify that. But they had him in the movie where they kind of just had him fight dirty. Like, he'd do weird tricks, distractions.
I'd say when it comes to that, it's the acknowledgement that some things you can get away with in one medium, you can't get away with in another.
Yeah, but they found a way to kind of do it in live action where it still fit what the character was doing in the anime, even if it was something different.
Yeah. Now, in the case of Blade of the Immortal, the reason why I disqualify that is because that was directed by Takashi Miike, who does not screw up.
I never saw the Blade of the Immortal live action.
Blade of the Immortal is one of my favorite manga.
Anime.
Blade of the Immortal did get an anime, but it was done by B-Train, and I sincerely think they were the wrong people for the job.
It's possible. Like, there were things I liked about the anime, but it just felt boring. Like, to have this guy who's like this immortal swordsman, it just doesn't really seem to do anything with it.
Well,
it just didn't feel like anything happened through most of the episodes I'd watched. I think I made
B-Train. The manga is significantly better. I'll put it that way. But B-Train is very good when it comes to slow burn kind of dramas. Whenever it comes to doing over the top action pieces, it's not within their element. Like obviously the big claim to fame that they have for a lot of people is going to be stuff like Dot Hack Sign or the Girls with Guns trilogy of Noir, Mad Lax, and El Cuzador. But the thing is that when it comes, they're best when they're used for slow burn mysteries. Blade of the Immortal is anything but that.
Now see, and one remake I was thinking on, but I don't know how to really talk about this one, is Dororo, because I've never seen the original, which was like back in the 60s or 70s, I think.
Yeah, and eventually the when there's a significant amount of difference of time between the original and a remake, I do think that you have to relax some of the factors when judging it.
Yeah, like I can only really judge the two by their side by sides, and the actual art style on the new one is so much better. But that might be a time thing. I don't know how much effort actually they got to put into the original. Because I know this is another case where apparently the creator died before he could finish the manga, so they had to kind of make their own ending for the anime.
Yeah,
I don't even know if the remake kept the same ending though.
I find that some of the best attempts at a reboot are ones that obviously honor what came before, but don't use what came before as a crutch. But try and establish their own identity within that umbrella. And I'd say one strong example of this is Cashern Sins. The original Cashern came out in this was a Toei work that came out in the 70s, and was very Toei superhero, if you catch my drift.
Yeah.
Actually, no, I take it back. I think it was Tatsunoko who did it. But the point is, it was a 70s superhero anime. There's a certain pattern that this kind of thing goes with. But Cashern Sins takes a much bleaker, almost apocalyptic, actually pretty much apocalyptic vibe. It's a post-apocalyptic series. Take with a lot of hand-painted backgrounds, and even though it has the same set of characters, it's able to portray them in a different way and create its own identity in the process instead of just trying to be exactly what came before.
I think that's pretty important, and why a lot of these anime remakes actually have been pretty good is either they're, like you said, the retries, where it's like, all right, we know we were missing a bunch of crap we couldn't put in earlier. Here we have a complete version now. Or in some cases, like Digimon or apparently Cashern, like, all right, we know what made it work. Let's make sure to use that and build something around that same core. If
it sounds like I'm dancing around things a little bit, I didn't want to present an issue of taking what came before and making it your own to say that I'm endorsing stuff like Ghostbusters 2016. I'm not. in a lot of reboots that you end up seeing, you end with the bad ones. I'd say fall into a few very reliable traps. One of them is feeling like they have to use certain scenes, characters, and as they were done previously, without any understanding of how and why.
Oh yeah.
Video game adaptations have the same problem as well.
Yeah, I think there needs to be an acceptance that some things aren't going to work, one, on a different medium, or if you're trying to kind of change some things around, it might not make as much sense to do it here as it did previously.
Mm-hmm. But I'd say another one is not understanding what made the original work and how you what to do with trying to remake it and what not to do. I know a lot of people pick on Ghostbusters 2016, but I do find it to be a very good case study in what not to do with a remake. Because some people will say the bad jokes or the bad casting or the politicization is the big problem. No, if you want to get to the core of why that thing was doomed from the start, it was that they fell into a trap that the original went out of its way to avoid. Where that even though it was a comedy, the idea of Ghostbusters was not. The idea of hunting ghosts should not be the joke.
Oh yeah, and I think we can kind of segment this to one of the other kind of subtopics is why does either the West or the East? That's sorry, I was trying to talk in the middle of a yawn there.
What makes one end work and the other? And I don't want to turn this into an East-West argument.
Yeah, I think there's certain things you just kind of see it happen more often. Certain things happen more often on one side than the other. Because I think overall, Japan their reboots tend to be better. I'm not saying they're immune from some of the stupid shit. They're certainly not. I guess it's more kind of why do we see that discrepancy? Why are the Eastern reboots generally viewed as better than a lot of the more Western reboots of shows will be?
Well, I'll put it like this: even though I talked about live action anime being dead on arrival so often, the worst that so many can aspire to is being meh. And I'd say it comes down to culture. I'd say it very much comes down to the culture in which they're created. It very much comes down to a culture to the cultural difference of making something that you want people to see and making something for people to just consume. Yeah. The difference between going out to dinner and getting fast food, and I know people have talked about cynicism in entertainment. And I've certainly delved into it my fair share myself, but I try not to as much as I can because I find that's way too easy. However, when it comes to a lot of attempts at reboots, the big I'd say one of the big deciding factors, which is something that I always try and look for, not any of the little things, but the big piece on where the whole thing turns is believing that nostalgia will do the job for you. That just because it's something nostalgic means that half the work's done. They're gonna eat it up.
Yeah, I think you see that a lot with a lot of these Netflix shows. Is they just need content. They just want to push out content for people to watch.
Netflix desperately wants to be looked at as a production studio and not a service. They want to say, look at all these cool things we made.
Yeah. Also, I think one of the ones they did, the He-Man one.
That's Amazon Game Studios has had that same problem. That's the reason why all of the games that they've put out have had so many problems. because you got a bunch of people who don't know what they're doing or don't know how to read the room.
Yeah, they're not a game studio, and they're trying to
consider
be a game
consider
studio.
consider the works that Netflix, for instance, since we're talking about them, have adapted or are planning to. Death Note, Cowboy Bebop now, eventually One Piece.
You see, I don't think that has a chance to be good live action.
Very, very very popular cross-cultural icons when it comes to the anime scene on both sides of the globe.
Yes.
And the mindset is let's adapt this popular thing, but not even pay attention to why it was popular, or in some cases trying to adapt it after the zeitgeist had come and gone.
Yeah.
Like when they did their live action Death Note. Death Note had already been wrapped up for about a decade by that point. It'd be like trying to do a live action adaptation of Afro Samurai now. This particular issue of focusing just on it because it's popular, all that you end up thinking of is that degree of popularity, and going, well, if we do our own spin on it, we'll be able to siphon some of that popularity because of how rabid that fan base is.
They don't understand fan bases.
And well, you probably know the story about what happened when Icarus tried to fly too close to the sun.
Oh yeah.
Now, when you're trying to be closer to a source material versus what people are used to, there is going to be that bit of shock. I mentioned before that the remake of Orphan that I've talked about, because of how different the light novels are compared to the 1997 anime, there's a lot of changes to the point where they're two completely different shows by the end of the first season. In that same vein, as long as there's an understanding of what you're doing and why, I think audiences are willing to forgive certain things. When 4Kids had done that reboot of the Ninja Turtles, there were obviously a lot of changes, but people were forgiving of those because it was very clear that one, they cared about what they were doing, and two, they had their own. They wanted to use what came before and establish their own identity, their own spin on it, without insulting what came before or the fans therein. There's the straw man idea that if you change the slightest thing, then it's the worst thing ever, and really the only people who hold on to that are the purists.
And they were never going to like the reboot anyway. Yeah,
even if I understand where some purists are coming from. One, they're seeing the forest for the trees, and two, come up with a better name, because when I hear purist, I think of the most obnoxious type of vegan.
Yes.
I don't like vegans. Or more specifically, I don't like a certain kind of vegan. You know, the kind who thinks that they're God's gift to the universe.
The chances are, if you know they're vegan, you probably won't like them.
No, you will know that they're vegan, exactly, because they will tell you incessantly. But the key that I want to focus on is understanding the audience, being willing to engage with them on some level. Not to say that you have to do the convention circuit or something, but just present the idea that you're honoring what came before. Can go quite a long ways.
So just to kind of wrap this up, because I think we've pretty much exhausted this conversation without getting into just pedantic details at this point.
Yeah, how to create new stars out of the current crop. And it's not like it's hard to create stars. The point that I'm getting at is when people keep talking about all the awesomeness that came before, how demoralizing is that for somebody who wants to create their own work?
I can see that. Like, I am kind of cautiously optimistic about how the reboots are going to be going. this is a trend that indeed keeps up.
I
But
will
I could
say
see it go wrong.
I will say to anyone who is cynical about there being too many reboots, um, if you're going to go that route, then you can't go on about how everything was better back in the day, because that is exactly what contributes to the problem.
Indeed. Alrighty then. I guess that will wrap up our first episode of The Monk and the Monarch. For all the different platforms this will be on, I'll have links in the description to Mildra's channels and Twitter, all the different things I do. You can follow him if you like a lot of tabletop gaming content. I think you have a couple interviews coming up, don't you?
Yes, I do. Um, let me let me check the calendar for a moment. So, on my server I've got a couple this week, not as many as usual, but on this Tuesday on my server, I'm doing a watch party of the Cowboy Bebop movie Knocking on Heaven's Door to kind of wash the taste of the Netflix out of my mouth. Um, Wednesday, I'm gonna be doing an interview with Centaur Games, and on Saturday, I'm gonna be doing an interview with Lightfish Games. And of course, I have the Geek Watch podcast that I record every Sunday, and usually end up uploading late Sunday night or early in the morning on Mondays.
Now, as a heads up to anyone who heard some of those, it might be a few days before this podcast gets edited and aired, so they might be up already.
Or we're time travelers.
That too. Yeah, and you'll be able to find any of my written anime and game reviews in the links as well. Well, thanks for coming, and I hope we see you guys next time.
Stay frosty.